Wonderful weekend with a wonderful and important panel to discuss the ongoing developments in Greece. Of course, Greece took a particularly dramatic position in the current global financial crisis because in a way it was the first out of the box to announce itself into the crisis and therefore was on the point in trying to develop new European institutional mechanisms to create a greater resilience than had been originally designed into the Eurozone. So it's wonderful then to be having this panel amongst us to discuss the problems in Greece. I'm the only one on the panel who's not Greece. I'm just another American kid from California. But I'm happy to introduce Ernesto Paniotto, who is head of the McKinsey office in...
Not head.
Works in the McKinsey office in Athens, and who studied, amongst other places, at the Kennedy School, which I'm very proud of, and therefore all of his mistakes are really our fault. But he gets credit for all of his wins. And Mikhail Bletsas, who has been at MIT's extraordinarily creative center called the Media Lab for many years, and is still there now, but has been back and forth to Greece, involved with Greece. It's his own country. And then, of course, Antanisios Orphanidis, who is a pure MIT product, is continuing to teach at the Sloan School at MIT, did his PhD in economics there, but in the meanwhile has served as an advisor to our own Federal Reserve Bank in the United States, to the banking sector in the European Union, as well as serving as governor of the Cypriot Central Bank for many of the recent years. So with that, I'd like to first ask Ernesto if he can give us some sense of what's the current business climate in Greece, what's the current state of dynamism, and particularly what's been done so far to reform the economy to generate greater economic capacity, and where are we in that process?
Thanks very much, Professor Heifetz. Let me just start with three key messages for today. First of all, something that we probably all know. This is a crisis of truly historic proportions. This is a crisis that in depth probably only resembles the Great Depression in the US. However, what is important to understand is that a lot of things have been done, and that there is significant potential ahead of us in the country. Finally, though a lot of work has been done, as I said, the reforms must step up. The structural reforms that need to happen in order to restore the confidence, restore the level of investments that are necessary for the economy to grow again, have still not happened. So there are a number of priorities that we would definitely need to focus on, and we'll see what those are in a while. To my first point, it's important to assess any progress that's been already done and also the priorities going forward, keeping in mind how serious this financial crisis has been for Greece. Here you see a comparison with other financial crises in Russia, in Argentina, in Turkey. What you see is that in the case of Greece, we've had a recession for the last 5 years. This is the 6th year in 2013 of recession in the country. The country has lost more than 20% of its GDP, and probably by the end of the year, we will have reached a loss of 25% of GDP. Unemployment is now standing at above 25%, and especially unemployment for the young is at staggering rates of about 40%. So this is definitely a perfect storm type of crisis like no other we have seen in recent years. a lot has been done, and we need to recognize this. So if you look at the correction that's happened in terms of the fiscal situation of the country in the last 3 years, you will see that the primary deficit has gone down by more than 20 billion, which in terms of percentage is around 9 to 10% of the country's GDP. Right now, the primary deficit actually stands at 1.5% at the end of 2012, which compares very favorably to some of the other countries in the periphery of Europe and in the middle of this crisis, like Spain and Ireland. It is still a little bit higher than Portugal, so if we've got Portuguese colleagues here, you should feel very proud about the progress in your country. In terms of competitiveness as well, if you look at the situation of unit labor costs in Greece, from the time that the country entered the Eurozone until 2010, you will see a dramatic deterioration. So dramatic increase in unit labor costs. In the last 3 years, almost all of that has been restored. However, all the fiscal adjustment and the correction has been basically based pretty much entirely on the cost side. If you look at what's happened fiscally, you will see that revenues only increased and impacted favorably on the deficit in 2010 when the first taxes were introduced. Since then, revenues have actually been declining year after year, given that the GDP has been declining and the country is in a very serious recession. On the cost side, again, the target lines of the P&L of the government have been pretty much the same year after year. So the first year, the cuts resulted in an improvement of about 12 billion. 2011, an improvement of about 8 billion. 2012, an improvement of 5 billion. So clearly, as we're moving forward in this crisis, the endurance of the country and the businesses to raise more taxes is being reduced. And also, constantly, we're targeting the same lines in the government budget. So there have been wage cuts, there have been pension cuts, there have been cuts in health expenditure. But it seems that the continuation of the classic paradigm of continuously cutting more and more cost out of the same lines is reaching its end. In fact, perhaps the most serious problem is that what's happened is that a lot of the correction in GDP has come from a reduction in investments. If you look at where we were in 2007 in terms of GDP and where we are in 2012, you will see that most of the correction, most of the change is actually coming through reductions in investment rather than in consumption. Even the improvement in net exports has not happened because suddenly we've started exporting massively to the whole world. We have improved in terms of our export situation in 2009, but if you look back in 2007, you will see that even exports dropped. It's just that imports have dropped by a lot more, and that's what's correcting the trade balance. So what do we do to restart? We somehow need to, first of all, identify some core target sectors that the economy can actually be competitive in internationally and can actually use as the growth engines of the country. That's the first point that I'd like to make in the next few slides. The second point I'd like to make is that in order to actually implement growth initiatives in those sectors, you would also in parallel need to introduce some structural reforms, which we have not done in the last 3 years. So let's see first what the sectors are. In 2010 and 2011, the McKinsey Greek office undertook a very significant, in my perspective, initiative, together with funding from the Hellenic Bank Association and also the Greek Federation of Industries. This study was called Greece 10 Years Ahead, and it was the first study that actually did look ahead and thought, okay, if we give ourselves a horizon of 10 years, what can we do? Where can we grow? Where should our country focus in order to be competitive, in order to achieve the growth that has been elusive in the last few years? What we did was we concentrated in the 5 key sectors in terms of gross value addition of the economy. So tourism, energy, food manufacturing in general, agriculture, retail. But also we basically identified 8 rising stars, 8 niche areas where Greece, given its natural inheritance and its climate and its geography and its people, can actually be very competitive at an international level. And those were things like aquaculture, it was things like generic drugs where we do already have a significant production, it's things like medical tourism, it's things like promoting Greece as a regional cargo hub. What can be the result? If we compare what we were producing in 2010 and look ahead, in 2021, what we estimated is that investments in this specific sectors could actually deliver an improvement of about 49 billion in terms of gross value addition or 55 billion in terms of GDP, and also generate about 500,000 jobs in the economy, in the Greek economy. Now, maybe in a US perspective, those numbers seem very small or insignificant, but in a Greek perspective, where the GDP right now is around 200 billion, you can tell that 55 billion is a big opportunity, where the employment force is around 5 million. This is 10 percentage points out of that. So by focusing in specific sectors and actually delivering change in these sectors, you can really achieve a lot. Let me give you some examples, okay? Some things that might be more familiar to our everyday lives. In terms of tourism, something that's very interesting is that when you look at Russian tourists, you look at nearby Turkey, it attracts 6 to 7% of those tourists. When you look at Greece, it attracts 0.7% of Russian tourism. You know, Turkey is a very nice country and nice beaches and everything, but Greece is also pretty competitive in that respect. So we would think that you can achieve a lot more than 0.7%. Same happens with China. So Chinese tourists in Europe go for the classic French holiday right now. You know, there's a lot to see, though, in a country like Greece, a lot of history, and we can take advantage of that history. Food manufacturing. This is what I call my Greek salad levers, right? So think about the Greek salad. What's in a Greek salad? You've got tomatoes, you've got olives, you've got feta, you've got olive oil. These are quintessentially Greek things. Yet when you look at the feta industry and the feta exports, you actually see that less than 30% of the global feta market is actually controlled by Greeks. Why? We think that percentage could definitely increase. If you look at olive oil exports, what happens is that 60% of Greece's olive oil is actually exported to Italy, where it is bottled and where a nice bottling premium is added before it is then re-exported as Italian labeled olive oil to the rest of the world. So that's the type of really practical things that we can actually do in order to capture more value for the Greek economy. Yeah. Let me then very quickly go to the different things that need to happen in terms of structural change, right? First of all, we've got the recapitalization of the banks, which has still not happened. The injection of liquidity in the country in order to really address the needs of credit-crunched small and medium enterprises. The unblocking of infrastructure projects. What we have seen is that if you actually invest an incremental 15 to 20 billion euro per year in the sectors that I mentioned, you can actually deliver the impact that we talked about before, so that extra 55 billion in GDP. The other point that we saw is a definite need for the country is to actually upgrade the skills of the public administration. And finally, a point that we all know is an issue in Greece and has not been addressed so far, at least effectively, the informality in the economy and the tax evasion. So we feel that you need to have those 5 things in place in order to deliver the impact and the change that we've talked about. Thanks very much.
Thank you. Michael, maybe you can help us begin to understand the life of an entrepreneur and how does an entrepreneur think about Greece as an opportunity, or what needs to be done in Greek public policy to make it more hospitable for entrepreneurial activity?
Yes. My experience as an entrepreneur was about 10 years ago, and ever since I've been following the scene very well. And I want to share 2 totally different experiences. First of all, as a co-founder of a high-tech startup in Greece, and then as a director of one of the largest Greek companies. There are many similarities and many things that we can take out of that. I cringe every time I see the studies about the short-term and the medium-term plan for Greece. Yes, it's obvious. We have to base ourselves, we have to base our actions on our core competencies right now. But, I haven't accepted that the business plan for my country will be to be the Florida of Europe. And that's what I have been doing ever since. That's why while I'm here, I never really paid too much attention to focus on my career here, and I'm always back and forth. Greece has a very high quality intellectual capital in the area of high tech. We have many, many examples, successful examples of companies that have produced competitive products. However, they never reach altogether a critical mass so that they become a significant part of the economy. The reason for that has to do with the structural issues of the country, which I'm not going to bore you with, but also has to do with something called subsidies. The policy in the country was to subsidize pretty much every activity. Similarly, we subsidized high tech in the same way we subsidized tourism, in the same way we subsidized agriculture. So, you know what? People were going for the easy money. And this has been a traditional weakness. We always, because of the way the economy was structured, pretty much 60% between the core public sector, the public sector around the core and the peripheral public sector, and the private sector in Greece, you had to sell to the public sector. And by the moment you decided to take that step, you were making yourself a Faustian deal. You were selling to a customer that paid very little attention to the quality of the product that it was buying, and very large attention to the process. So you were training yourself to be completely uncompetitive if you wanted to sell to anybody else. And we had many, many examples of companies that developed core competencies that could not be applied successfully anywhere else. So the crisis is actually an opportunity for these companies. Yes, it creates a lot of distraction everywhere else, but young engineers in Greece right now do not have the option of selling to the public sector. And this is a good thing for high-tech entrepreneurs, because they have to focus immediately on the larger markets. We're part of Europe, and trying to focus yourself on, or starting from Greece, is not a very good first step. So we see more and more what I think it's a very realistic model for Greece. Companies doing research and development in Greece, not being incorporated at all in Greece, since they are not doing business in Greece, and that solves the problem of having to deal with bureaucracy, which is improving, but it's going to take some time. I mean, there is a lot of inertia in the system, and focusing abroad. Another country has done that extremely successfully and has become the #1 per capita tech power in the world right now, our neighbor Israel. And I think they present a very successful model for us to follow over there. And I've seen many, many companies following it. When it comes to following the Israeli model, though, we lack a necessary ingredient, a very important ingredient, and that ingredient is called venture capital. In Greece, we have many, many things that call themselves venture capitals that are really not. When we started the company 13 years ago now, we went as, we talked to a lot of people. The answers that we were getting back then is, what real estate do your parents have? So that we can underwrite the investment in your high-tech company. These days, things don't happen anymore. However, we still lack venture capital, and the reason is that we have many, many small funds that do not have the ability to do many investments in a venture capital way. Even in funds that have been built for specific that reason, they work more as a distress funder of sorts. The capital markets for Greek companies are completely shut off right now. The normal financing mechanisms for Greek companies are completely shut off. So the way that these funds usually work is by providing liquidity for companies that have established products, have some form of clients already, to finance their expansion. This is not venture capital. This is investment banking, this is financing, this is more traditional. So the government can play a role, but right now cannot, because it doesn't have any money. All the money that it uses for those efforts are coming from the European Union, and with money from the European Union comes a lot of strings attached that A, create a lot of bureaucracy, and B, they are already spread out. Like, we created 2 funds instead of 1 out of the Jeremy funds in Greece. When it comes to large companies now, the financing is completely dry. You have the phenomenon of all successful Greek companies relocating abroad, and they are not doing it for tax purposes or anything else. They are doing it because they cannot get any financing. And in Greece, the populist press is really having a field day with them. To share an experience with you, I sit at the board of Hellenic Telecom, one of the largest companies in Greece and one of the largest foreign direct investments in Greece. We are owned 40% by Deutsche Telekom these days. We wanted to raise 160 million euros in the beginning of the market to roll over some bonds. In the beginning of the year, last year, we had to go to our Bulgarian subsidiary to raise the money and then pass it over, which, by the way, we have up for sale. So in the sales prospectus, there is a clause that says, whoever buys it gets a rebate from us, from the money that this company just passed over. That was the beginning of the year. I have to say, I'm very proud because OT just 2 days ago announced the fiscal year, the fiscal and calendar year 12 results. They were very good. And it was the first company that successfully went out in the market. You have to take the successful part with a grain of salt because we raised money at 6.5%. It's a good first step. It took a big weight out of us. We have room to grow. We don't have to sell assets to the first bidder. Now we have some room to move now. And we still have efficiencies to harvest, as has the rest of the Greek economy. The problem with efficiency harvesting is that it doesn't create jobs. And this is a big, big issue right now. So we have to be more outwards looking. This is happening. I just came back from Greece yesterday. Samsung just bought a semiconductor design company out of the Coralia cluster in Athens. So we have the seeds all over the place, and we have a very straightforward business plan. Part of it is what Ernestos just said. Part of it is further in the future increase the weight of high-tech, high-value-added services. Part of it is improving public sector, and there I have one last comment to make. We tend to do point interventions in the legal framework of public sector. We had the famous fast track, for example, to encourage quickly foreign investments. We really have to stop doing that. Why somebody from Qatar has to get a better deal in starting a business compared to an established Greek company? We really have to go and focus on what's wrong. We have a legal framework that's very expansive, covers everything. It's built on the premise that whatever is not explicitly permitted is prohibited, unlike the US. We really have to correct that. We really have zero tolerance from risk, zero tolerance from failure. This is the other big European problem, I have to say. This is not only a Greek problem. We really have to start cherishing failure in the sense, if we learn from it.
Experimentally.
And of course, I'm going to leave the last part to Mr. Orfanidis. We really have to do something with financing because right now everything is totally stopped when it comes to, in general, economic activity because the banks are completely dry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Mr. Orfanidis.
I'm going to start with a disclaimer. I'm only half Greek from my mother's side of the family. My father is Cypriot. That's why I'm both there.
We can forgive you that.
The other disclaimer is that I've lived most of my professional life in the United States. So 5 crisis years back in Europe, but I do have a more U.S. perspective in the other respects. We have shared already some of the progress that has been made in Greece, and it's important to keep in mind that out of the carnage there is some progress that is coming out. Much more progress can be achieved, but we do have some reason for optimism when we see that the macroeconomic fundamentals are actually turning around in a major way. We have also seen in Ernestos' presentation some of the fundamental excesses that needed to be corrected, and some of the gaps that are there right now. Let me focus on one number Ernesto pointed out. The the big drop in investment, which is going to link the two presentations we've shared already. Let me remind you that the big drop in investment we have seen since the beginning of the crisis in Greece is actually hiding a much bigger problem. Before the crisis, since Greece joined the euro area and until the beginning of the crisis, there wasn't as much investment as there should have been in Greece. What we have seen in Greece, unfortunately, is an episode where cheap money was brought in and consumed, either by the public sector or by the private sector. So a huge opportunity was lost in the first, let me say, 8 years of joining the euro area, where incredibly cheap financing was available that could have been used to invest in the real economy, to raise the economy's potential for the future, and instead, to a large extent, it was consumed. And there, the public sector, as we all know, has a lot of the blame for the overconsumption that we've seen. So it's actually tragic to see a 50% reduction in investment since from that point, taking into account that we didn't have enough investment in Greece to begin with. And the question is, how do we make this happen going forward? How do we ensure that there is investment going forward over the next few years, over the next decade, to achieve the potential that is there? I'm not going to comment on the specifics of projects. I actually would definitely go for the low-hanging fruit that Ernesto pointed out. For example, the medical tourism is a no-brainer if you can organize it, because this is so much weather-based that you can have it, and you have the human capital is there to actually make it happen. But as Mikhail has been pointing out, the high tech would be another area. I'm not going to go into that. I'm going to focus rather on the financing issue, as I have been asked to do. And there, I think this is appropriate to spend a few minutes describing the problem in the broader European context. And in light of having this European conference, which, by the way, is a great conference to have, it's useful to note that one of the major problems Greece is facing right now is not Greek-made. It's actually the outcome of how Europe overall mishandled the crisis so far, and the unwillingness so far to take the next step, deepening the European Union and the euro area in a way that would help out. What do I mean by this? Before the crisis, Greece had a banking sector that was not bad. Greece did not face the problem that Ireland faced, and did not even face the problem that Spain is now facing. The Greek banking sector was essentially bankrupted by the political decision that was taken to impose a so-called private sector voluntary involvement. After, of course, many years in which the sector was, let me use the polite word, nudged in investing government bonds of the Greek state that, according to international standards, the Basel agreements, for example, were meant to be risk-free, and were meant to be risk-free by decision of the governments and by decisions of the international government community. Banks were encouraged to have this stuff. So this is how the Greek banking sector was bankrupted, not because of excessive risks taken by the banks themselves, but because of the political decisions that were taken. This is step one. And what we have as part of the solution in Greece right now is we're wondering why Greece cannot restart its economy, and we have to ask the question that Mikhail asked. Who's going to provide the financing? as part of the solution, if you call it that, that European governments imposed on Greece, the banking system is destroyed. Part of that solution actually fragmented the system more than it was before the crisis. Before the crisis, for example, you had French banks being invested in Greece. Perhaps the biggest example of that was Crédit Agricole, that had a subsidiary in Greece, in Emborigi. Well, Crédit Agricole was severely punished for actually having operations in Greece. It ended up losing several billion from its investment, and was essentially, let me again use the polite word, nudged to move out of Greece. And this is just an example of what is going on in the euro area. The broader problem we're facing is that even though we started the experiment as an experiment in which we meant to create a single market in everything, we have in many respects ended up creating a single market in products and in many services. But since the beginning of the crisis, we have effectively renationalized the banking sector completely, and the banking sector remains member state based at the moment. And then on top of that, for the case of Greece, since we've destroyed the banking sector, there is nobody who can lend. So let me give you one of the solutions to this. That is not a solution to the Greek situation, but is something that would make a huge difference for the case of Greece. And this is the notion of the banking union that we've seen already and discussed many times at this conference before. By now, we should have had it already. You cannot have a single market with a single currency, a common monetary policy, a common central bank, and believe that you're going to have stability if the banking sector is segmented across national lines. What we need going forward for the euro area as a whole, not just for Greece, is actually the establishment in the euro area of a combination of entities, much like we have in the United States, of a Federal Reserve having the supervision of the banking sector for the whole euro area, and FDIC, which would have the Deposit Guarantee Resolution Authority for the euro area as a whole. If we had these things in place before the crisis, right now, Greece would not have been a destroyed country. Greece would have been a country much like California. Not that bad. The state finances are a mess. And yes, there are pay cuts for state employees. There are questions about the funding of universities. But the state is doing great. Why? Because the company that Mikhail would have liked to set up, or the next one he would like to set up, can actually get financing and doesn't rely on a bank that would have the headquarters in Sacramento and whose cost of financing would depend on the cost of financing of the Californian government. We knew that we needed that in the euro area before the crisis, but we didn't do anything about it. Politics always gets in the way of doing what is economically the right thing, until you have a crisis and you run out of alternatives. And there, for the last 2 years, there has been talk, and I believe a deep understanding, that going forward, we need to unify the banking system in the euro area. Unfortunately, of the 3 elements that are necessary to do this, which is the common supervision, the common resolution authority, and deposit guarantee, so far the governments have only agreed on the first one. This is progress. It's progress that the European Central Bank in Frankfurt is already in the process of writing regulations that would make it the supervisor, the single supervisor, with the help of the national central banks, of course, of banks in the euro area. Unfortunately, that's not the most critical component of unifying the banking system. The fact that the ECB could, say, a year from now be the supervisor of Greek banks is not going to solve the fact that the cost of financing for a Greek bank is considerably higher than that of a German bank, to the tune of many, many percentage points, which is what is creating the dissonance with the lending side and the availability of credit we have right now. So I'm going to close with this very European element, that the faster we actually move in completing the banking union, that in principle we all agree is necessary to complete the project, the greater the opportunities that would open up in the countries that are stressed right now, and in particular in Greece, that is paying the highest price of any member state in the euro area for making progress. And once we have these steps, then we're going to let the experts on the micro side tell us where to invest the money. Thank you.
I want to open it up in just a minute for your discussion and your, so that you can engage with all three panelists. It's really wonderfully illuminating for me. I'll just speak for 1 or 2 minutes and then open it up to you. My association with Greece has been on the political side. I've been traveling to Greece on a yearly basis since 1998. A couple of my students became prominent in Greek politics, George Papandreou, and then another teaching assistant was recently his chief of staff and then minister of trade and culture, tourism and culture, Pavlos Yorlanis, wonderful young man, not so young anymore. So I've had the opportunity to be back and forth and to do some, provide a sounding board, at least from the perspective of those two people and their political views. Most interesting to me were 2 episodes, the Greek rapprochement with Turkey beginning in 1999 and the profound impact that has had, I think, on the political artistry that required is still a case yet to be told properly and taught. Papandreou's capacity for diplomacy was probably essential from my point of view, in at least giving Greece a chance during the last 2 years, because I don't believe there's anybody in Greek politics who would have had the patience and stamina to negotiate with the Chancellor of Germany and the President of France to provide the buffering during those first 2 years. Dishing out pain is always difficult in a democracy. It's much easier to dish out pain if you have an authoritarian regime and you can suppress people's capacity to boot you out. But in a democracy, it's extremely difficult to dish out pain. Nobody survives much longer than 2 years if you're dishing out really severe pain in democracy or certainly in parliamentary politics. We'll see what happens to David Cameron. I would only round out the picture that has been told before to shine the light not on the sort of the key economy generating institutions or political institutions, but to instead turn our head 180 degrees back out to the general publics. Because ultimately in politics, it's the permissions that you're given by the general publics to stay in a long-term adaptive process in which a lot of transitional pain is necessary. And the structural reforms that are needed, the economic reforms that are needed, even had Europe responded not to generate the crisis they did, I would agree with Mr. Orphanides that the response to the crisis was a key component, critical component in generating the severity of the crisis. Germany always seemed to be one step behind the curve. But ultimately, the people have to understand why they have to go through a tough period of transition. And you can put people through a short-term transitional pain, 6 months, 12 months, and not get yourself thrown out. But if the pain's going to last 2, 3, 5, 10 years, as is the case here, then the people really need to be held tightly to understand and appreciate the need for them to absorb that kind of pain. And that kind of political work is difficult for people in politics to do because the overwhelming tendency is to get captured in conversation. Your calendar, the daily calendar, gets captured by talking with these kinds of folks, or the banking folks, or the people in key instrumental or policy positions, or to do international diplomacy. All of that ends up taking up 150% of your time, and you end up having very little time actually to spend mobilizing the general public in understanding the nature of the pains that they need to absorb. And that becomes then a real challenge to political leadership. How do you keep people in the game without panicking, or without looking for scapegoats, without wanting to say, if only we got rid of the immigrants, our problems would be solved, or various ways of looking for an easy answer to what are ultimately the necessities of changes in the hearts and minds, mindsets, economic relationships of people all the way down to fishing villages and family, clientelistic relationships. So if I had anything to add from my experiences of being in Greece quite a lot over the last few years in particular, it's that frequently the needs for the kind of public leadership that will educate and mobilize publics to comprehend the nature of the changes in their lives that are necessary. That kind of public leadership gets crowded out by the demands of the more immediate crisis technical problem solving. Okay, let me open that up then to all of your questions so that you can engage with these three extraordinary people from each of their different perspectives. Questions? There are microphones up here on both sides, so please don't hesitate to come up and pitch your questions. Yes, please.
Hi, my name is Yanni Lekbelos. I'm a senior economics student at Yale, and I'm very interested in the perspectives that Mr. Panagiottou and Mr. Blesas raised about how to jumpstart investment in Greece. I'm also curious about your comment, Mr. Panidis, about the European Banking Union. While it's very interesting, your comparison to California misses out on the fact that California is effectively bailed out by every other state, and that doesn't have to do with the banking union, right? At the end of the day, before in Greece there was a lot of financing that was squandered, and now there's hardly any financing, not even for the good ideas. And everyone, this is the discussion. Should there be a European FDI program for Greece, since no one is willing to put out the money for their risk appetite? Or basically, to your point about the EBA, sure, it would have helped, but now how would that really bypass the appetite for risk that is just not there? If I have a startup in Greece, I have a hard time finding money, and in fact, I do.
Yes, please. Why don't we answer each question as it comes? Which one of you guys?
I can go first on this one. So on the California example, it's not correct that the state of California would expect to be bailed out by either the federal government or the other states in the United States. We have had a history, actually the United States history, since the Confederation serves as a good roadmap for what we might see as a development in Europe. And we did have at the beginning of the Republic, and I hope we have historians who can correct me here on the US side, we did have the famous bailouts, if you wish, of the states that were incurred during the Revolutionary War at the very beginning when the states was founded. But since then, we had a very clear understanding in the United States that states will be led to fail if they do not manage their finances. So the state of California faces incredibly high financing costs right now because investors cannot trust that it will actually manage to collect the revenues that it needs, especially because it has a lot of clauses to pay out salaries and universities and so forth, which is very similar to the Greek situation. However, if you are a startup firm in California, you don't have to worry about that. You actually can get your funding from a bank that is incorporated in Delaware, a tiny state. And this is another example of telling you that the bank assets per GDP of the state of incorporation don't matter in a monetary union if you do this right. Imagine what the bank assets over Delaware GDP is, for example. We don't even talk about these things in the United States. That's the sort of thing we talk about in the euro area right now, because we have made the mistake in the euro area of allowing the banking system to continue to be nationally based. So right now, it's not just Greece. Take Spain. Why is Spain paying a financing cost for the state that is several percentage points higher, depending on the maturity, than the United Kingdom? Why is that? Well, because there are concerns that its banking system may go under, and as Spain doesn't have a lender of last resort on its own, since it's part of the monetary union, it faces the cost of potentially having to bail out, even temporarily, the banking system in Spain, and that is driving the whole thing to ruins. This is a very adverse loop that has been recognized by governments, and indeed, if you go back to in June of 2012, a very important decision that was taken by the European Council was precisely to start moving in the direction of a banking union in Europe to break this adverse loop between the banks and the sovereign. The existence of this loop is one of the factors that the euro area remains in crisis, and I fear will continue to be in a crisis until we break it. So your cost of financing in Greece would not differ on a risk-adjusted basis from the cost of financing of a similar startup you would start in the Netherlands or in Austria or in Germany in that model once the banking union is completed. Whereas right now, the differences are so large so as to completely drown out any investment that could materialize in Greece right now, and this is happening, frankly, in Spain and elsewhere.
Yes.
Hello, my name is Haris Vladakis, and I'm an MBA student at Wharton. First of all, I'd like to thank all our panelists today for their excellent presentations. I would like to ask Mr. Blechas a question. Being one of the founders of probably the most successful Greek startup of, well, I mean, the past decade, let's put it like that. My question would be, the following, like, being an entrepreneur yourself, what do you think are the key non-financing related obstacles that young college graduates have to face in Greece when trying to replicate success like Velti? And what can it be done from the state perspective or from the business world perspective to help overcome them?
The first of all, I think you need a culture of persistence. Velti tried and tried and tried again until it found. And it got lucky in certain perspectives because it was able to always realize the failure early enough and restart itself. So persistence is one characteristic. The other characteristic is to decouple yourself from the return on your capital as an individual. If you like what you do and you like being in Greece, that's the reason why my partners, my co-founders went there. They knew from the beginning that they would have a much better chance of success here, but no, they wanted to live in Greece. So they picked up and they went there. If you decouple financial success and you have a specific goal, then it will happen. Second, you have to be very inventive in Greece. Velti was able to successfully raise money eventually from Greece, but it was very, very inventive, and it took many sleepless nights and many last-minute checks, many phone calls here in the middle of the night, go to Negroponte, sell him some more shares. We need to make payroll tomorrow. We had that happen. It happened a few times. Thankfully for me and for Nicholas, it was one of the most successful investments he ever made. It takes, you have to be very flexible. These days in Greece, you can find, engineers are much cheaper. If you are in a startup like information technology, the infrastructure that you need is a lot cheaper, and you can get it in ways that are even cheaper now with the cloud being available. If you are offering an information technology service, your market is limitless, so it's easier for you to go out. We used Greece as a lab, for example, and it was very hard for people to replicate what we're doing because we're doing it in the Greek language. We saw what stuck, and then we went and we took it global. So being flexible, a lot more flexible, and having your eyes open to non-traditional opportunities, being willing to accept lower rates of return, at least initially, are necessary qualities. And
But staying in the game and knowing
Just
there's
keep-
going to be a lot of trial and failure.
persist, and you will persist, and you will do it. It's persistence is the most important thing. If Velti succeeded, it was because Christo and Alexandros, my co-founders, were extremely persistent and extremely flexible in what they did.
I'll just follow up to that. Do you believe there's anything that can be done from an
We're-
institutional
I think,
standpoint?
I think, we only have a few more minutes, so
Okay.
if you wouldn't mind, so
Follow
that
up later.
the other people can ask. Thank you so much. But feel free to come up afterwards. Yeah.
I wanna make a reflection, and I have missed in this conference and in the dealing with the crisis in Europe, how to deal with social pain. The fact that many decisions are taken in Brussels makes it easy to not care, or in Germany or wherever in Europe, makes it easy to not care about what people really feel in the last instance. So my question is, are there any models that include or parameterize social pain? Or how would, if there were some, how would you include them in these economic models in order not to deal with the wildest phase of capitalism where we are currently living in?
Any of you guys want to comment on that?
I can comment on this briefly and say that, we had Benoit Guérès talk yesterday that talked about the social consequences of unemployment. I mean, the thing is, we must not be fooling ourselves. So it's one of the things I picked up from Rudin Dornbusch, my advisor, during my PhD years, was that populism always ends in tears. If we fool the public, and this is what is trapping politicians, we actually maximize social pain during a reform. So if we want to minimize social pain, we want to be as frank with the public as possible and then implement the necessary reforms as quickly as possible. This is what minimizes social pain. This is what minimizes unemployment and restores growth. And we have good experiences like that. So compare for a minute, since we're talking about Greece and the euro area crisis, compare for a minute the experience of Ireland with the experience of Greece in the last 4 years. We have had much less populist rhetoric and results, the work being done in the case of Ireland. And I would argue that the social pain has been much, much lower. So I would say that people care about the social pain. The question is whether the politicians have the courage, which sometimes it can be self-destructive, to try to minimize it by being frank with the people. And institutional organizations can help with that. It's always easy to bash the IMF, for example, but it's not as if the IMF is just a building that doesn't care about people. They do care about people, too.
Yes, maybe we'll just hear from the two of you quick questions, and
Hi.
maybe need to say
Hi,
goodnight.
my name is Oliver Grimm. I'm a journalist for an Austrian newspaper here in the US. Quick one to Mr. Orphanides. You pointed to the fallacy of cheap money going into Greece, fueling silly consumption by the public and the private. My question is, where was the ECB during these first 8 years that you mentioned, where cheap money did silly things in the US?
Okay, you have 30 seconds to answer that question.
Sure. The ECB has a very clear mandate, which is price stability for the euro area as a whole, and I think the ECB delivered beautifully on its mandate. And subject to that, for the euro area as a whole, the ECB as an institution contributed to welfare. It is well understood with the construction of the euro area that the national governments, unfortunately in retrospect, had too much sovereignty to mess up the economies in their countries. For example, the misuse of cheap money in some member states, Greece is the worst possible example, is something that could have been averted with better national policies by the Greek government. I should point out that this mistake, if you wish, has been recognized. So part of the adjustments we have seen in the Euro project, for example, part of the fiscal compact and the competitiveness work we see in the Euro area as a whole, and the increased power the Commission would have to monitor macroeconomic developments in the member states, will improve this going forward. So we needed these institutions, and I would argue that the ECB has always been calling for strengthening surveillance on competitiveness and fiscal affairs, and I'm very happy that I see this happening. This is part of the solution.
Thank you. Last question.
Yeah, Nicholas Ashford, MIT. What strikes me about these 2 days is there are really 2 conferences going on. And the one assumption is that we're trying to figure out how there can be economic recovery. And all your presentations really underscored that somehow we have to get back where we were. The system is okay. It's both a European and a Greek problem, and I have no argument with anything that you said. The problem, if you listen to the luncheon talk today, which many of you were probably not there, you understood that there's another problem here going on, and that is you actually cannot have a recovery of the economic system. It has to be a transformation of the economic system. We are in a perfect storm. You can recover the productive capacity of nations, but there isn't going to be anybody there to buy the product because we have been systematically, sorry to quote Marx, replacing labor with capital for 30, 40 years. You cannot return to a system which was characterized recently by giving credit and subsidies for production and credit for purchasing on the consumer side. And you create a quasi-equilibrium, which of course fell down. I mean, the prospects for Europe are less than the US, which are figured, the smart money says 1.9% over the next decade. Europe, for a variety of systemic reasons, is much lower. I think the part of the conference that have been operating under a recovery hypothesis are really blowing smoke. I mean, they're blowing smoke. You don't see
Sir, thank you.
the real problem.
No, I think you got it across. Nesto, you haven't had a chance to comment. Do you want to see if
Sure.
you can respond to this?
No, I mean, I actually agree that there needs to be a transformation. I think a lot of what we were trying to say before is that you do need to change the way things have been working so far. That was, I think, part of the structural reforms that I mentioned. That was part of Mr. Orphanides' talk around the need for a new banking, unified banking system in the European Union. And that was also part of what Mikhail was saying when he was talking about startups and how, there needs to be a transformation of the way both in which entrepreneurs are thinking about them, at least in Greece, and taking the risks and not being afraid to fail and really persisting. I think that is actually a transformation for Greece. And also in terms of financial institutions really working in a way in which they position funds to these companies. So I think we've all had a transformational element in what we were saying.
All right, well.
I have a comment on that.
Okay, please.
We can argue about that, and I think you can have a very nice discussion with Clayton Christensen when his new book comes out, but Capitalist Dilemma. However, I think that it will be a mistake in the case of Greece not to recognize that despite the larger European problem, which nobody discounts, I think none of us discounts, we have certain issues to deal with, that we have to deal with in the country, no matter what.
Yes.
If we don't establish trust in between the state and the citizen, in between the various business entities,
Yes.
if we don't accelerate justice, takes 10 years on the average to resolve a business case in the courts in Greece right now. If we don't improve on our educational system, doesn't matter what political views or political economy views we take, we're going to fail. So that's why I said that our short-term and medium-term path is pretty much predetermined. The only parameter that we have some control and actually we will be judged upon is how quickly we implement those. And going back a little bit to the other questions, and I'm finishing, is that the biggest failure of the management of crisis, but the political class recently in Greece, has been the absence of a vision. They never communicated a clear vision out there. Going from one loan installment to another is not a political vision. And without a political vision, we go nowhere.
All right, well, please, let's